everyone, and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for another St. Louis FC post-match edition, and quite frankly, I'm going to keep this one a little brief, at least hopefully so. I'll mention right off the bat that due to the stream problems, I just kind of gave up on watching the game in and of itself. I was following along on Twitter, and quite frankly, that was maddening enough. St. Louis FC, for whatever reason, is going into some weird tailspin. I understand that there was a tie in there that served to at least get a point, but that game was extremely disappointing. They also lost to Swope Park Rangers. Now they've lost to Tulsa as well. These are the bottom feeders in the league, ladies and gentlemen. St. Louis FC should be to the point now to where we should at least expect to win these kind of games, and we are not right now for whatever reason. Sorry for my phone going off, but it's extremely disappointing, and I understand, given the nature of the roster, that they were trying to give some players a little bit of rest, and I'll get into that here in just a second, but it doesn't really matter. The players that were in there were still the vast majority of people that we saw last year or that have been brought in this year and have performed in other games. For whatever reason, whether it's the game planning, whether it's just poor in-game management, whether it's poor performances by the players, whether the players aren't necessarily prepared for each game, whatever the reason, it's just not good enough right now, and I don't know that it's going to necessarily magically get better. We're at the point now to where the hard decisions have to be made. Decisions need to be made by people who are above you and I, and they need to start taking a hard look at where this team is, because going forward, this team needs to be somebody who's in playoff contention, who is making the playoffs, because attendance is starting to slip just a bit, and that shouldn't be the main driver behind a lot of these kind of moves that the team might need to make, but it is a factor. It has to be a factor, because these are the kind of teams where you're not going to be getting a whole lot of revenue from your TV contract, if you even want to call it that, since you're putting it on YouTube. The majority of your money is going to be coming from ticket sales and ad revenues, ad sponsors, and what have you. So the fewer people that show up, the fewer ad dollars that want to come in, because people are saying, well, you're not getting as many people as you were last season. And it's very small. There's still been a few sellouts, and we're still having a very respectable attendance, still in the top, I believe, 25 in soccer attendance across the country, and that includes MLS, so that's still pretty good. But I understand that each situation is its own animal, but when you have teams like Louisville who get a bigger attendance than St. Louis does, when you have teams like Cincinnati coming in and filling up an 18,000-seat stadium with semi-regularity, then averaging around 4,000 to 5,000 people isn't necessarily all that good. Now, you could make the argument that if you had a bigger stadium, maybe more people come in. Well, you could argue both sides of that, because you're not necessarily filling to capacity every single game the stadium that you have. So if you had something bigger, wouldn't that necessarily mean more empty seats? But that's not the point here. The point here is St. Louis FC is not doing what it should on the field to warrant more people showing up. The fans are doing all they can. Everybody is doing their part to say, hey, bring a friend, bring somebody in for that experience. I heard the people behind me, although sometimes they aggravate me just a little bit with the discussions they had, but I heard somebody behind me talking about how they brought somebody in, one of their friends, for that Tulsa game to where they scored like a ton of goals. And you had to kind of tell them and say, hey, this isn't necessarily the way things always go, but hey, this is a good sampling. Come back and sample some more later on. Well, now all of a sudden they're getting into a stretch in the season where they're just they look terrible. They haven't scored a goal here in quite some time. They haven't looked like scoring a goal here in quite some time, and that's the disturbing thing. I don't care if you have Irvin Herrera on the field or if you have him on the bench. I don't care who's in an attacking position. These are people capable of putting the ball in the back of the net. They're not doing so, and I feel that that is because the way that the team is structured, and that goes back to the people in charge. Again, I do my best not to advocate for anybody to lose their job, because as a person that has lost their job, it is not an enviable position to be in. I don't like the idea that anybody is put in that position. But when it's a results-based business and you're not getting the job done, and your background was such that you kind of got the job simply because you were the man in the area, and it's not to say that they aren't good coaches, but St. Louis just has this arrogance. Oh, well, you're from the St. Louis area, so let's bring you in because that makes you good. Well, that's not always the case. It doesn't hurt to look outside the area for talent, for coaching, for what have you, and this team needs to start broadening its horizons, because a 2-0 loss to a team like Tulsa, who, quite frankly, I'm sorry to anybody who watches that is from there and supports that team. I know that you give your all to your team, and I'm sure the players do too, but quite frankly, they're all awful. And St. Louis dominated them every single game up until this one, and now all of a sudden, just because there's a little bit of tinkering with the lineup, you can't even score a goal. I understand, I talked about it a little bit, that there was a change in the lineup, but we're to a point now to where there's changes within the players, within the roster, that you can argue make sense, you can argue don't make sense, but there's changes within the players on the field, but there's no changes into the way the game is played by those players. And I think that is what is disheartening right now, because we're just not seeing it translate into anything on the field. It was successful earlier in the year. Now it's not. Those are the times you have to make those decisions. Whether you're the coach, whether you're the general manager, you have to make decisions that are going to impact your team in a positive way, and I don't feel that those are being made right now, and it's extremely disappointing. There's games coming up. There's one on the 23rd for St. Louis FC, and hopefully they can manage to win one at home, get the good vibes back, because right now there is nothing good and enjoyable about this team other than the fact that it is our team. I want to know what you guys think. Leave a comment in the comments section. Comment, rate, and subscribe. But until the next time, this has been The View from the Midwest, the post-game review of St. Louis FC. They fall 2-0 to Tulsa. Until the next time, though, I'll see you then.